Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in today's video, we are going to be recreating, or at least partially recreating, this trim piece from a BMW E36. So if you've got an older car and the plastic parts inside are no longer available, this is a common use case and questions that I get asked for 3D scanning content. Like, how do we recreate pieces that are broken, or how do we create our own version of this piece? So for example, with this trim panel, if you wanted to do a different set of switches over here, or if you wanted to incorporate a gauge or digital display or something like that, then you would need to recreate this part. And so what we're going to be talking about today in this video and a couple of other videos, we are going to look at QuickSurface Personal, which is a new release from QuickSurface. We are going to be talking about this in Fusion, and I might actually take it into Plasticity as well. I've gotten several comments on actually using Plasticity for some 3D scan related parts. So the first thing that I want to talk about is going to be what we're going to cover. So that's important because I think it's always best that we level set expectations. Now, I get quite a few questions on the channel about specific parts, and most of those questions or comments come from trying to create the base shape of a part. Now, most people do okay with creating features like tabs and mounting holes and things of that nature. It's really the broad shape where we run into problems because we have to figure out, well, are we going to use surfacing? Are we going to use freeform tools? If we're using one or the other, how do we go about getting it to be as accurate as possible? And then where do we go from there? So the extent that we're going to go on this part is we're going to create the outside shape, which is going to be basically what you see when it's installed in the vehicle. And I'm going to do some work on this inside opening. Now, when I say some work, what I mean by that is this isn't for my car. I don't have an E36. And this is going to be designed for 3D printing, which means that it is going to be dependent on what features are required to actually install it in the car. So for example, tabs like this, these generally have a metal clip or some sort of plastic clip that snaps into place on a vehicle. Or they may be holding switchgear for things like windows or sunroof or something like that, right? So because this isn't my vehicle, I am going to take a basic approach on getting the rough shape down and then all of the extra little features that may be required. And so, for example, this spot right here, this is likely a spot where the shift boot probably clips underneath. And the reason that the geometry is made the way it is partially for injection molding, access to create that sort of that lip there. And it might be partially for other features. So you can see there's a little tab there. So I'm not going to focus on all those little details. Those are the things that really add to the amount of time it takes to create a part like this. So we're going to, again, focus on the broad shape and the basic process to do this. Now, if you understand the basic process, the rest of it should be fine. I do want to talk about QuickSurface Personal because we do get a lot of comments on the cost and use case for the various licenses of QuickSurface. So if you want to skip ahead, then I'll put chapters in this video, but I'm going to talk for just a few minutes on QuickSurface in general. Remember, we are an affiliate, so if you're looking to buy, we do have a code. I'll put it in the description, but you can use LEAD10 and save 10%. That is true for, I think, all versions of the license, but there is a QuickSurface for SolidWorks, which is an add-in. I haven't really talked about that much on the channel. I find that the tool set available in QuickSurface Pro has a lot more functionality than the version in SolidWorks. And so I personally would use Pro standalone and then import the design into SolidWorks if needed. But there is a SolidWorks version, again, not really talking about it. The Pro version is $4,000. I think there's going to be a new license structure that is coming out that will offer some additional options to that. But essentially, that's the full suite of tools. So you get full analysis tools, the ability to import and export CAD files, no restriction on any of the tools that you see in the UI. And so that means all the CAD tools are open, all the surfacing tools are open. There is a really nice auto freeform algorithm that's used in the Pro only version. It's different than LITE. We've talked about that in the webinar that I did for QuickSurface. So if you're interested in those differences, we did the same part in LITE and Pro to highlight those differences. And there are other things. So for example, in 2D sketching, there are auto sketch options. So for example, and we're not going to really go through this much, but there is a sketch assist option that comes in addition to what we have here for extracting primitives. And there's, again, some auto options that you get for things like additional sketch planes, so you can automatically create a bunch of sections through a part. That's not available for us in the personal version. It is available to some extent in the LITE version, but the auto sketch stuff is not there as well. And so when we think about Pro and LITE, those are both commercial products. And that what that means is if you are using it for commercial uses, if you're trying to design parts to sell, then those are the tools that you would want to go to. LITE is typically something that I would use to do some processing of the scan, alignment, maybe extracting some primitives and freeforms or auto-fit surfaces, doing some analysis to see how close those are, and then I would export it to a dedicated CAD program like Fusion or SolidWorks or Inventor. Now, the personal version, it's about half the price, close to half the price of LITE. But the main difference here is that we actually have a few more tools that we don't have in LITE, but we have more restrictions as well. So you can't import CAD data. You can only import meshes. And you can't export CAD data. You can only export your meshes as an STL. And so what this is really intended for is users who are cleaning up meshes or can do all their design directly in here and then export it to be 3D printed. Now, if you're doing it for commercial use and you're trying to machine the part or whatever the case might be, you really aren't supposed to be using it for that. And again, there are restrictions for things like exporting. So that's something to keep in mind. But if you are, a scan user and you need things like additional scan processing tools, aligning to a coordinate system, being able to extract primitives and see how close and compare and analyze how close it is to the mesh. These are all things that you can do directly in QuickSurface Personal, QuickSurface LITE or Pro, obviously. So with all that said, if you're interested, I'll leave a link in the description to the section of the QuickSurface website where QuickSurface Personal is. It's about, I think, $20 a month without a discount, so $240 a year. You have to pay for a full year, so it is a subscription, but it is, a tool that is more reasonably priced for those that are using it for hobby purposes. Now, if you are still thinking, well, it's too expensive, I think that you just have to consider how much time you spend doing these operations, whether or not your time is valuable enough to, dedicate $20 a month. Now, for me, just the alignment alone is a very important step to working on the design. And because we do need to align scans and extract planes and things like that, because of those things alone, I would say that $20 a month, even if you use it one time, was probably worth it for the time and effort and accuracy that you get out of it. But that's just me personally. Don't necessarily want to sell you on it, but want to give you as much information as possible. So with all that said, now that we're 8 minutes into this video, let's go ahead and talk about how we can create the shape. So there are a couple of different ways that we could do this. I tend to lean towards freeform modeling for most scan-based shapes, and that's usually because the stuff that I do is less prismatic in nature and more organic shape. So this is a very good example of that. Now, remember, it is an injection molded part, so in reality, a lot of things have draft. So for example, these faces are drafted. This isn't something I scanned, it was sent to me, but I asked, and I am allowed to share it with you guys. This is a part that is broken. There are some spots on it where there are, inconsistencies in the surface. And I think one of the tabs underneath was broken that's been glued back on. But again, it's a good sample. So the way that we're going to approach this, again, is starting with Freeform. I'm going to go to Freeform Tools. And the first thing that I want to do is make sure that my snap is set to on. This means that we're going to snap to the closest point on the mesh. The next thing that we're going to do is take a look at the display and change it to curvature. Now, when we change it to curvature, what this is going to allow us to see is where the area of the mesh is more flat and then where those fillets and those broad curves start to come into play. So basically what we want to do is we want to replicate the bright yellow area. And because this part has so many holes in it or openings in it, that complicates things quite a bit in terms of the process that we're going to take. But what we want to do is we want to start in this upper left corner I'm going to go to the upper right corner. Again, staying in those yellow areas. I'm going to come down here and come all the way over. Now, obviously this, if I turn on analysis, is going to be way off, right? I'm going to go back to a shaded mesh display. And that's because, one, I've got not enough edges, not enough divisions to match the curvature. So what we need to do is we need to start dividing this up. And the way that we want to do this is we want to make sure that we are not trying to snap anywhere in these open areas. So we're going to approach this by selecting this upper edge. And there is a tool, you can hit S on the keyboard. And so what S on the keyboard is going to do is it's going to split. So if you follow any of the Fusion videos that we do in Forms, this is essentially like inserting an edge. The way that this works with splitting or subdividing is it's going to try to keep all of the faces roughly the same size. So hit S on the keyboard, and now we've divided it up. We want to make sure, if we rotate this around, that we're not snapped underneath the mesh. So you can see here, that is snapped down here. And that's just basically because when it divided this up, its closest point ended up in here. So what we want to do is we want to drag that back up top and kind of see where it goes. Now, if I go back to a top view, you can do this from up here, and I actually was told a pretty cool trick of the way this works is it will snap based on the closest mesh point in our view. So it doesn't matter if it was snapped to the bottom edge because we're viewing it from the top, it'll use that as its closest orientation. So we're going to do this again, hit S, and I'm going to hit S one more time. And you can kind of see there's some blue areas here. And if we move this around, you can kind of see how it changes from blue to green. And essentially what we want to do is we want to get it to be as green as possible. I'm not going to spend a ton of time getting it perfect because the one side of this part actually has a little bit of a dip in it, which is, I'm told, is accurate. And so I'm not going to worry too much about the nuances of that because if you can get the basic shape down, then you can spend more time and tweak it and get those nuanced changes. But now that we've got the outside and it's mostly green, we now need to work left to right. Now this is where we need to be careful because again, if we hide the surface, we've got all of these holes here. So if I just divide this up, or if I split this side, and I'll do this and I'll undo it, what's going to happen is it's going to try to push those points to basically wherever it can. So I'm going to do Control Z and undo, turn off snap mode, still select that edge and hit S and split it. I'm going to split it up here again, and I'm going to do it one more time. And again, it's going to sort of normalize everything. From here, instead of turning snap back on, what I'm going to do is shift select these 3 points, and I'm going to use the option to snap to mesh, so push that down to the mesh. And I'll do the same thing over here as well. So select those 3 and snap them down to the mesh. Now for the stuff on the inside, this is where we're going to have to take a little time and we're going to have to move these around until we get it to kind of match the surrounding shape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all 3 of these sort of internal edges. And I'm going to slowly pull them down in the Z direction and watch the changes that we see. So you can see obviously if I go down too far, it's going to start messing it up. And as I pull them up, you can see we're starting to get some green around that area. And so what this tells me is I'm likely going to have to work with these individually. So basically going around and playing around with them until I get the geometry to be, mostly green. Now it's not going to be perfect, but really what we want to make sure is that we're matching the mesh as we go around. And again, this is going to be largely dependent on how accurate your mesh is. And so if there are inconsistencies in the mesh, then obviously you're not going to be able to match this perfectly. But play around with it and kind of move things up and down until you're happy with the result. Now you can obviously divide this up more, but you still will need to be careful. So for example, if I hit S up here, again, what I'm going to do is select some points. Let's go ahead and push those down to the mesh. This one should be over the mesh. This one might be over the mesh. It's not. Hit undo there. All right. And we also have the smoothing brush. And I'm going to turn snap on for this. Go to the smoothing brush, and I can kind of play around with the points up here, and that will normalize things. But again, because of the holes in the middle of this, you tend to run into some issues just simply based on the fact that there is nothing in the middle for us to attach to. All right, so this is fairly close. And I say fairly close. It's not perfect. We could play around with moving this edge. Let's go up here. I'm going to select both of these, make sure snap is on, and kind of move the edges around, and maybe move these points around. And you can see here that's kind of messing that one up. So Control Z, undo. I'm going to turn snap off and kind of move that around. Just see if I can get it to be a little bit closer, touching that portion of the mesh. All right, so overall, I think it's okay. It's not perfect, but I don't want to spend an hour, playing around with this. You could spend, 10, 15 minutes just playing around, dividing it up, making sure that you're as close as possible. And then what we're going to do is we're going to close this, and now we've got a surface. Now, as we look at this, here you can see we're definitely well below on this edge. Now, if you look at this and you're like, well, it's not close enough, we can always go back and edit. So again, with snap off, what I'm going to do is hit S here, and then I'm going to select these 2 points, pull them down to the mesh. I'll select these two. They should hit something, pull them down to the mesh. I'm going to make sure that these points are all touching the mesh. Same thing here, and same thing there. All right, so as we rotate this around, let's go this way and just see. Going to go back to a shaded display, and then we're going to close it and finish. So you can see again, we're a little bit low. Probably tells me I could use another division over here, but for our purposes, I think it's close enough. So I'm going to run with that. And what I would do from here is I'm going to select the surface, go to my surface tools and extend. Now, if you turn on edge chain, it'll select everything and we can expand it out. Now, one change that has happened in 2026 is we actually, in many cases, we actually don't need to extrude a curve to use it to trim or extend a surface. In some cases, it will extend out on its own when we're using things like auto trim. Now, I'm not 100% certain that those are in the personal license or just the pro and LITE licenses, but there are some changes there which are helpful. All right, so now we've got the basic shape done. We have an understanding on how this works for the Freeform version, but let's talk about some surfacing tools as well. All right, so what we're going to do for this curve over here and this curve over here is we're going to generate them with surface tools. So this gives us another sort of tool in our toolbox that we can use. So I'm going to start with CAD. Also note on the main tab that we've got some options here, the drop down for surfacing. So we're going to start with a 2D sketch here, and then we're going to use a 3D sketch. But if you want to go to the tool tabs, you can go to the CAD and the surfacing tabs for the tools that we're going to be using. All right, so we're going to start with a 2D sketch. I'm going to pick the OYZ plane because it's going to give me what I need over here. We are going to make sure we are using the scan data. We're going to create a sketch on the slicing plane. And we're not going to do stack sections. Again, that's not really something that we can do in Personal. It's a Pro feature and a LITE feature. Outline mesh we don't need. I don't want to hide the scan data when we're creating. I'm going to leave that unchecked. I'm going to say create. All right, so we're focused on this side over here first, and then we'll come back to this one. And so basically what we have is we need to generate the top surface we just created with Freeform should be right here, and that will extend out so you can see that. And what we really need is we need to deal with this fillet, which that is going to be something we do after the fact with an actual fillet. And we need this vertical surface here. So I'm going to use a line. And if you hold down Control, it'll snap to the sketch or the mesh that's the mesh section sketch that we have here. So if you want to be more accurate, you can snap there. I'm going to hold down Control and left click. And then I can drag this up. Now, again, if you hold down Control, it'll snap here. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just draw it to be about like that. And then I'm going to say OK. Now, there are some things that we need to consider here. Now, when I say some things we need to consider is that represents basically what's happening in that tiny little section right in the middle. But as you can see, this sort of fillet is rolling over the edges. Now, in order to create a curve on here, what we need to do is use a 3D sketch. Now, a 3D sketch is going to allow us to draw directly on the mesh. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click at this bottom point here so we snap to it. And I'm going to come over here all the way to the end. Right click and say finish. Now I'm going to go to the basically the cursor mode. I'm going to drag this down. This curve is snapped to the mesh. Now we can adjust it, we can move it up and down, you can do whatever you need to. And you can do this 3D curve first and the 2D sketch afterwards, that's perfectly fine. But just keep in mind that we are snapping to the mesh. Snap is on by default. And that's something that is helpful when we're trying to create this geometry. We could also do this by following this curve. So for example, let's just go from here, kind of up, snap to that, come down here, and go right there. And then right click or double click and finish. And so what we have now is we've got this curve, which follows essentially the fillet, or we've got this curve, which follows that bottom edge. And we can use either one depending on the geometry that we're looking at. Another nice tool that we have is this extrapolate, which we can take these endpoints and drag them out. Even though snap mode is on, it will allow us to extrapolate past the edge of the mesh. And so that way we've sort of got that geometry there. So we're gonna say okay. Then I'm gonna go to the surface tools and loft. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna loft, we can go this one, and then we can go to pick for the guide and we can pick that line and you can see that it generates that surface. We could do the same thing with that bottom edge. Again, it really depends on the geometry that you're using. And then what we can do is we can select that, go to surfacing. We want to extend the surface. We're gonna turn off edge chain and we're gonna pull this down and extend that past, because ultimately what we're gonna do is we're gonna trim it at the bottom. Now, if we go back to our sketches, you can see that we've got both of those in a single sketch, but we have a reference for that bottom edge if we want it. And actually, let's go ahead and turn the sketches off. And we've got this surface, which we can trim later. So if we bring back both surfaces, we can see that we've got our top surface, which is freeform, and this one, which is a loft. So we're gonna do the same thing on the other side. This one's a bit easier because it's not a true sort of roll. It's a more consistent fillet. So what we're gonna do again is go to our surface tools, 3D sketch, and I'm just gonna create with a couple points, just kind of come along that edge. And then again, double click or right click and finish. Go to extrapolate and I'll pull this out. We'll say okay. And then we'll create a 2D sketch again on that OYZ. We'll create. And now you can see it gives us this pink dot, which is the location where our 2D sketch is intersecting our curve. So it automatically knows where that is. We can snap to it, and then I can just essentially draw this up tangent to the direction of our surface. Remember, we're gonna add a fillet after the fact, and then we can say okay. All right, so now we're gonna do the same thing. We'll loft this curve, we'll pick our guide curve as our straight line, and we'll say okay. And again, if we need to extend it down, we can. This one is actually probably pretty good where it is. Another thing I do want to mention in the loft tool, we do have analysis. So we can see how close we are. You can see that we're a little under here, but again, for our purposes, I'm fine. I'm not going to mess with it. All right, so let's bring back the other surface. Looks like they extend through the top. Everything extends. So what we want to do is we want to select all three. We're going to go to trim, and then we're going to trim that top piece away and that side, this top piece and that side, and we'll say okay. It's going to merge faces, which means that we're going to be left with one surface. The next thing that we want to do is fillet this. So if I say fillet and grab this, I can pull this down. Once again, we have analysis, so we can see how close we are. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to get it till it's mostly green, red, or at least we see. You can see there's a low spot here. Again, there's like a dip in the surface. Again, if you spend more time on this, you can get it closer. I don't think it's worth it for what we're doing because, again, if you're the person making this part, that's where you really spend all your time. If we're just trying to understand the process, then I don't think we need to go through all the nuanced details to make that happen. All right, so again, analysis turned on. Looks pretty good, and drag it down just a bit more. Note that we do have a couple of different types of fillets. So you can see there's a chamfer here, and then we've got, we can change the shape to be conic shaped or curvature continuous. Curvature continuous is something that can be pretty helpful depending on how the fillet was created on your part originally. In our case, I'll probably just stick with circular and just get it close enough. So that looks pretty close to me. We'll say okay. And there we go. That's the basic shape. Now there's one more thing that we really need to do to lock in this basic shape, and that is trim it. So this gets a little bit tricky. What I'm going to do is basically I'm going to come in with a straight line, and this corner gets rounded, so it needs to have an arc there. I'm going to come back and do that arc after the fact, but I'm going to go, let's say from here. I don't really need to trim this part, but I do need to trim this left side. So again, we're going to come in here, get it kind of close enough. I'll come back with an arc. So I want it to be essentially tangent at this intersection. So what we'll do is we'll click on this constraint. We'll say tangent. I'm going to hit escape. Then I'm going to pull this until it roughly matches. And again, this outside one doesn't really matter. And because we don't have tangency there, I can just drag it away. But we want to make sure, again, we're trimming the left side and that side. All right, so we'll say okay. And again, we don't need to extrude that. If we select our sketch, let's go ahead and we'll select that sketch, Control select the surface, and we'll select trim. And so what this allows us to do is select the areas that we want to trim away. And if there's anything on that side, it's all good. And we'll say okay. And so what we're left with is a trimmed version of that surface. We do still need to trim this away. Now there's a couple ways that we can think about this. If we look at the bottom of this, if it is planar, we could use, let's say, a plane. Like select that face, maybe select another area over here, make a plane, see how close it is. It's fairly close. We'll create that. And then if we select the plane and the surface, and we go to our trim tool, it essentially treats it like a surface. But then we're just going to click all the faces of the plane, say okay, and get rid of it. All right, so that's one way that we can go about it if it is truly planar. Again, we can use sketches, we can use other surfaces to trim it, but sometimes if you do actually have a true planar face, that can be helpful. All right, so that is the basic shape. Now, again, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the rest of these features, but my videos tend to go pretty long. This one's already almost 30 minutes. So if all you really needed was to understand how to create the basic shape, that is how we do it. When we do this in Fusion, I'll actually be doing the entire basic shape as a freeform body. You could do that here in QuickSurface as well, but I do think it's important for anybody using QuickSurface, whether it's Personal or LITE or Pro, that you do have an understanding of the other tools, like constructing primitives or using the surface options for 3D sketching on the mesh, or extrapolating data with 2D sketches. So that's all stuff that we can kind of do in Fusion, with the exception of the 3D curve snap to a mesh. That doesn't really work, at least not currently. So I think it's important that we understand how to do that. So next steps for us are going to be to build out this inside section. I'm going to come back and I'm going to do that in a second video where we talk about doing that here in QuickSurface, and then we'll thicken it, we'll turn it into a solid, and we'll work there. And the main reason I want to separate it out is because there's actually several steps that we're going to have to go through to build out that geometry, and it's just going to probably take another 30 minutes. I don't want to make this video that long. But if you have any questions on what you saw so far with the freeform creation, the surface lofts or trims, or any questions on QuickSurface Personal, please leave a comment and let me know. Again, I'll put all the information for QuickSurface Personal, our discount code, and all that stuff in the description of the video. So again, any questions, comments, leave them below. As always, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.